The night clerk at the front desk caught me as I was entering my hotel and handed me a package marked urgent. I took it with me to the bar where, frankly, I planned to get really drunk. Who wouldn't under the circumstances? Tearing the wrapping paper off the package at the bar, I found that it contained the packing box from the small video camera I now had in my pocket, and a printed note. Essentially, the note instructed me not to get drunk. I was to go to my room and make at least one copy of the file from the camera's memory card on my laptop, and then several more on whatever media I had on hand. I was also advised not to keep all the copies made and the original in the same place. After drinking the scotch I ordered and another shot on top, I did as the note instructed, burning one copy of the file to a DVD, which I then took out and put in the hotel safe at the same time as sending the second one to my sister. I was only able to make 2 copies because I only had a couple of blank DVDs and CDs in my laptop case. I suppose it was morbid curiosity that made me watch the show again before I put my head down and tried to get some sleep. Wasn't entirely successful on that score, however. God only knows how I looked the next day, but everyone in the office tried to stay away from me if they could. Around noon, 2 plainclothes policemen came into the office, wanting to have a quiet victory with me. I took them to an empty office where we were alone for a while. They explained that there was a bit of a disagreement about how Constance, who claimed to remember nothing of the previous evening, had suffered a skull fracture, even though it was only a microfracture. From the way they talked, I inferred that someone had assumed as if I had behaved rather violently the last time they had seen Constance and me together. Of course, they didn't say who had made that claim, but it wasn't hard for me to guess. They refused to confirm or deny that it was Copeland. It took me a little while to find the right moment in the recording, and I asked if they wanted a copy. They actually asked for the original recording, but I said I wasn't going to let the thing out of my possession. In the end, they accepted the copy I'd made while they waited, on a DVD I'd stolen from one of the computer guys. While my laptop did its thing with the DVD, I arranged for one of the girls to bring us some tea, and the officers and I sort of struck up a friendly conversation about the previous few days. That is, if you can ever have a friendly chat with an on-duty police officer. They showed a lot of interest in my mysterious friend, but I think it was mere curiosity on their part. The videotape proved that he hadn't harmed Constance either. In fact, the officers wondered if there was no way to press charges against Copeland because he was the one who pushed Constance away pretty hard. They said they would ask the people at the Crown Prosecution Service to have a good look into it. I think they were just mildly interested in who had a grudge against Copeland and why. They said I should be careful and suggested that Copeland was a pretty powerful lawyer. At the same time, as if to draw a line, they had reason to suspect that Copeland wasn't quite up to basic ethics in all of his actions. "You mean like having sex with other people's wives, for example?" I said. "Oh, and in so many other ways, Steve, we just can't get a handle on the bastard. Let's just say that, unofficially, he's on a lot of police interest lists. But if you don't mind me saying, you seem to be taking things a little lightly, Steve." "What else am I supposed to do, officer? Lose my temper and start beating my chest? If I'd behaved the way you think you expected me to, wouldn't you be leading me to your car in handcuffs right now?" I asked. "Yes, Steve, I think I would have," the officer smiled back. "In my experience, officer, once the goulash has been dropped and all the shit has been sprinkled on you, the best thing to do is laugh it off, or at least try to do so. It actually baffles the minds of those who would wish you misfortune." Both officers laughed and then shook my hand as they left. Later that day, I went out to find a working phone booth and called a lawyer suggested by a friend of mine. He was expecting my call and simply asked if I was going to get a divorce right away. When I said I had few alternatives if I wanted to be able to hold my head high in public in the future, he simply said he would sort it out and then asked if he could send one of his staff to visit me later that day. She needed to take all the data on Constance and me. I asked if I should write the woman a check to reserve his services, but he informed me that was already taken care of. "Don't ask why, Steve, but you'll never get a bill for my services. Someone we've both met intends to put the cost of all this on Copeland, you know. He comes from a very wealthy family and has made a lot of money himself, just not all of it strictly legal." That night, the whole group waited for me at the bar, obviously hoping that I had calmed down enough to talk about the night before. Oh, they had all gone through the day's papers by then. I thought it was funny that I hadn't seen any of that day's papers scattered around the offices since that morning. I gave them the short version that I had gone into the house and caught Constance having fun with Tony Copeland. They asked about all the press coverage, but I denied knowing anything about how it all happened. Hey, it was true. I really had no idea about anything. It was probably about 9 o'clock in the evening when my new lawyer, extremely pretty but also very efficient, I don't know if she was a companion or an assistant, arrived at the hotel to see me. We went to the hotel library to talk privately. The first thing Miss Clarkson, yes, that's the last name, told me was that she had already spoken to Constance and advised her to get her own lawyer as soon as she was released from the hospital. It's much easier for your own lawyer to explain to a client that they have nothing to fall back on. You know your wife doesn't want a divorce? I know. Here, look at all these text messages and voicemails she sent me today. I responded by showing her my cell phone. Has she tried to call you? Yes, but I'm pretty busy here. I suspect that's what she and Copeland were counting on. That's about right. Copeland's obviously been after her for some time. She claims he only succeeded this week, but, well, in my experience, people tend to skimp on the truth when it benefits them. Well, he wouldn't have had someone spying on my movements unless he had reason to believe that he had the opportunity to sleep with Constance. Sleeping together, I believe that's the word you're looking for, Mr. Marshall? Steve, Miss Clarkson. Everyone knows me as Steve. Very good, Steve, but I'm afraid I'm Miss Clarkson to everyone but my fiancé. I imagine he must be very handsome. And manly, Steve, believe me. Oh, I do, Miss Clarkson, I do. She smiled at me for the first time, breaking the businesslike expression on my face, but then returned to the reason for her visit. Surprisingly, she already knew almost everything she needed to know. Miss Clarkson pulled a piece of paper out of her briefcase and sketched out a list of questions. Constance and my full names, dates of birth, our wedding date, and so on. I watched as Miss Clarkson simply put a check mark next to the correct answers she had already typed out. There were a couple of minor errors, but that was it. Everything was already there, including the value of our house, but not the contents of our bank accounts or details of our savings. I could hardly remember them myself, not in detail anyway. Miss Clarkson then placed a form in front of me for me to sign. It was in fact a contract in which her boss instructed her to act on my behalf with regard to Constance, my divorce, and any other legal matters, whether they arose from our divorce or not, until I terminated the contract in writing. Before leaving, Miss Clarkson suggested that I call Constance and talk to her. In fact, I made it clear verbally that I had no intention of forgiving Constance for her actions. She also said that I could find Constance at her sister's house. Your house is being watched by the press. You might find that you would find a little more peace if you could find somewhere else to sleep this weekend. Steve. Miss Clarkson's always been a little awkward about addressing me by my first name. Oh, by the way, your employers are acting well, being rather vague about your whereabouts. I had to wonder who asked them to do that, and more importantly, when. After Miss Clarkson had left, and I was veiledly questioned about who my delightful visitor was, I went up to my room to call Constance. Oh, the boys were somewhat shocked when I told them that Miss Clarkson was a representative of my attorney. None of them could get over the fact that she paid me a visit at such a late hour, and kind of wondered how much her legal representation would cost me. The call was answered by June, Constance's sister, and our conversation was short and concise. All June could think of to say was that she was personally sorry for what had happened and hoped we could remain friends. Then she said she was going to go out and bring the stupid, feeble-minded cow. I think those 3 words expressed June's attitude toward her sister's behavior. About a year later, during my honeymoon in Malta, by coincidence, I ran into June again. But I'll come back to that later, too. The press apparently didn't recognize where I was by the time I spent the weekend with my sister and her family. My sister and her husband were very understanding and didn't push for any details. Hell, they probably would have read about most of them in the papers anyway. Sunday night, when I got back to the hotel, I was handed a restraining order. I couldn't understand shit, but Miss Clarkson explained to me over the phone that Copeland had obtained an emergency restraining order prohibiting me from publishing in the press any footage taken on the night in question, or posting it online. Hey, come on. I couldn't make any fucking sense of all this legal gibberish at the best of times, but at least Miss Clarkson managed to get the gist of it into my dumb head. But I didn't, and I don't intend to, I replied. We know, but someone else did, and still intends to do their best to compromise Copeland. Oops. Yes, and you can expect to be summoned to appear before a high court judge tomorrow morning. But don't panic, we've got it covered. Glad to hear you're not panicking. You're paying us for this. What can a high court judge do to me? Send me to jail? Well, yes, but I told you we've got it under control. On Monday afternoon, I found myself standing in the defendant's seat face to face with a very annoyed judge. I didn't say a word. My attorneys, several, dressed in wigs and gowns, did all the talking, informing the judge that there was also an anonymous third party who had made a recording similar to the one I had, and at the same time. To my some surprise, the police photo analyst confirmed that the pictures in question were not stills from the recording I had made. Yes, by the way, the two photos in question somehow made it into the hands of the national press. I actually think that if Copeland had done nothing, only less reputable and sensationalist publications would have printed them. And eventually they did, but along with all the other newspapers and media outlets that could get their paws on the scum. Both of the photos showed Tony Copeland. In one, he was peering out from behind Constance's naked body with a surprised expression on his face. The other showed him putting on his pants while a naked Constance lay on the floor behind him. In none of the photographs could Constance be identified. The judge apparently found it hard to believe that I had no idea who my mysterious companion was that night, and he pretty much said so. In the end, however, he seemed to agree with my reasoning, and reminded me, actually informing me, for I had not understood the court order handed to me at the hotel, that there was a temporary moratorium on the release of all recordings made in the house that fateful evening. Then I was told I was free to go. Fighting through the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse was a hell of a struggle. Copeland managed to get an emergency injunction on the grounds that he was in a private home and argued that he had a reasonable expectation of privacy, or at least words to that effect. The newspapers vigorously fought the injunction against publication, and I strongly suspect they were assisted by my lawyers. When the case went to a full court hearing a few days later, the judge quickly lifted the injunction. The gist of the judge's decision was that the private property was my house, not Copeland's, and that he could not reasonably expect any privacy within its walls, especially in one of the common rooms. And since the people who made the recordings were me and my guest, even if I didn't know the person by name, Copeland had no right to object to them being, in whole or in part, in the public domain. Well, I think that's what the judge was saying. Most likely, all the shenanigans did little except increase public interest in the story, because all the newspapers and TV news programs had this very thing as a headline, and I wasn't the only one expecting a prominent print of the two photos, and a few more that appeared in the days that followed. Hey, when they were finally acquitted by the court, the damn headlines and stories attached to those photos were brilliant, from my point of view. Underneath one of them read, "Caught in the act," and the other, "Coward's Flight." The attached story explained that Copeland was calmly dressing while his lover lay unconscious on the floor beside him. However, it was obvious that whoever took the footage from the video and gave it to the press was very careful about what they were doing. Constance's face was either cut out of the frame altogether or was actually blurred out. I guess you could say that things were back to normal after my antics with the Supreme Court Justice. I finished my second week in the new office and then returned home. However, I found that I couldn't stay in the house, so I temporarily checked into a small hotel not far from work. In the meantime, I received a call from Miss Clarkson informing me that she had been contacted by a lawyer working for Constance. From what Miss Clarkson had told me, I gathered that Constance was having a hard time with the press guys. I guess they must have discovered that she was staying at June's house. Anyway, Miss Clarkson reported that Constance's lawyer said that his client didn't want a divorce, but if I insisted, Constance would agree to the terms I proposed. "We told him your name isn't Hamilton," Miss Clarkson said with a giggle. "Hamilton," I repeated, having no idea what that was supposed to mean. "Bloody hell, Steve, get on with it. What year is it? Trafalgar, Nelson, Lady Hamilton? Oh yeah, very funny, I lied. I really couldn't get my thoughts together talking to Miss Clarkson. Anyway, Miss Clarkson said Constance was in a hurry to get it all over with. Perhaps she thought it would somehow lead to the press leaving her alone. But in fact, I suppose the press had moved on to other matters long before our divorce proceedings began, although it got a small headline in the inside pages of our local press anyway. I agreed that everything should be split strictly in half, provided that Constance was willing to admit that the only reason our marriage was breaking up was her affair, and that she would agree to appear as a witness in any further legal action I might take against Copeland. Somewhat surprisingly, Constance's lawyers asked me to agree to appear in court as a witness in a case she herself was prosecuting against Copeland. This baffled me until Miss Clarkson informed me that it was probably a personal injury claim and that the video of the event, a copy of which had already been sent to Constance's lawyer, would probably be sufficient for Copeland to settle the case out of court. I assume he did because I never heard about it again. The house was sold very quickly. Well, the market was very good then. Constance came by to pick up the few things she needed, and I put the rest in storage until I found another house I liked. But I didn't really bother looking for one. Living in a hotel may not sound like much fun, but you get used to it. There's less work, no cooking or anything, and it's cheaper than paying a mortgage. Hey, I even had free parking right downtown. Occasionally, I was tracked down by the odd reporter, and I was even willing to talk to them. Anyway, they didn't really seem interested in Constance and me. Everyone was asking me what I really knew about my mysterious friend. I couldn't tell them anything, I'm afraid, but a couple of them, with whom I got on well and who told me in confidence that they thought there was something about Copeland that had not yet been revealed, and that they thought it must surely concern my mysterious friend. Well, I passed their business cards to Miss Clarkson. Although by then she claimed to know nothing about the man personally either. That didn't quite fit with some comments she'd made to me earlier in our acquaintance, but she used the words, "know personally." I don't know. It's been maybe 2 or even 3 months since that fateful evening. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, one day I was sitting at my desk, staring at my computer screen as usual, when the desk shook. Someone had sat on it. I looked to my left and saw a pair of knees covered in gray flannel. Looking even more to the left, I noticed that the flannel fabric stretched almost all the way down to a pair of Nike sneakers. Looking up again, I came to my senses and saw an oversized blue sweater topped with a mop of ashy blonde hair and a pair of giant black horn-rimmed glasses. "Hello, handsome. What's a nice gentleman like you doing in an establishment like this?" Sherry asked. "Hello, Sherry. Long time no see. What are you doing in the middle of nowhere?" I replied. Sherry explained that our company had become one of her employer's largest clients, and she was assigned to visit us for 1 day a month. Literally, just to spin around and talk to the actual employees in the various departments, just to see if there are any changes needed in the program that might make their lives easier. "So, what can I do for you? I'm happy with the way things are." "Yeah, you'd be the first one to tell them upstairs if you're not happy with anything. No, Steve. I'm here to collect on your debt." I have no idea what expression appeared on my face, but it caused Sherry to giggle. "Hey, handsome, you owe me dinner." "I do? Yeah, you sure do. You said you couldn't take me out to dinner because you're a married man. And from what I read in the papers, you're not married anymore. Did I say that?" "Well, not in so many words, but that was the gist of what you said in the hotel bar that night." "Was it?" By this time, I was trying to keep a confused expression on my face. "Come on, Steve, will you stop screwing around?" I can't remember what you said to me that night." "Steve!" "All right, beautiful. I haven't been out in weeks. This could be good for me. Where do you want to go?" "Oh, nothing much. I've got to catch the train home just after 9. "That's disappointing." "Dinner," I said. "Steve, behave yourself." Bloody hell, why do you beauties always say that? "I'll be in the waiting room when you're done," she smirked, then slid off my desk and left the department. As before, Sherry's transformation was remarkable. When I stepped off the elevator, there wasn't anyone who wasn't looking at her. God, I don't think any man walking through the reception area while she waited for me could have missed her, and probably would have wanted her to wait for him. The two security guards she was talking to, both in their 60s or older, were clearly fascinated by Sherry. As I got closer, she moved away from them and took me under her arm. "Where are we headed?" she asked. "First to my hotel, I have to change." "No time, handsome. We have less than 4 hours. My train leaves at 9. "But, no buts, Steve. We have a lot to talk about." I agreed, and accompanied by one of the guards who insisted on carrying Sherry's porta-pod, we headed for my car. Sherry's porta-pod and briefcase were stowed in the trunk with mine, and I drove us to an inn just outside of town that I knew served food all day. We talked for a while and had a leisurely dinner. Sherry was not so much demanding as inviting me to lighten my soul and speak my mind. I don't know how it is with Sherry, but I felt I could talk to her and instinctively knew that what I would say would not become common knowledge the next day. When I spoke up, Sherry took me by surprise by going on the attack and telling me why she had lured me out of dinner. "Steve, you've got to do something about yourself, my friend. The entire female staff at the office says you're not the fun guy you used to be. Mind you, they all admit they can't blame you under the circumstances, but frankly, they'd like to see some sign that you still have the old Steve in you." "Don't I understand you, Sherry?" "Yeah, I don't think you see it. Steve, you've always been fun to work with. Even I knew it when we worked on the same projects 4 or 5 times. And even then, we never worked closely together. You see, for a long time, it was almost standard procedure in your company for all women to report their man problems to good old Steve in logistics and planning. And from what I've heard, also some guys would come to you for advice about their wives and girlfriends. Did they do that? That's news to me. Anyway, even if they did, I no longer have what you might call a good track record in marital relationships, do I? Nonsense, Steve. The reason everyone came to you was because you were showing them how to laugh. Well, at least look on the funny side of things and laugh at them. Apparently, you were an ace when it came to advising girls about birthday and Christmas presents for their men. And you advised them to get rid of the hopeless ones immediately, or the bad ones, and suggested ways to get rid of them. Did you know, for example, that completely unofficially the girls in HR tell the newbie girls that if they have any problems with anyone in the office who turns out to be an Alfonso, and they don't want to make a formal complaint, then they should find you and talk to you? That's news to me, but I can remember. Yes, I suspect you can. But Steve, everyone's afraid to say 2 words to you now. They say you walk around the office like a bear with a sore head. They miss the old Steve, the one they could laugh and joke with. Look, we all understand that you're upset, but living in this damn hotel and never going out, well, it's just not right. Not for you, anyway. You need to get out and, well, start dating again. There's plenty of eligible women in the office. Sherry, I think I know what you're talking about, but didn't you tell me dating coworkers was a bad idea? Besides, we went out tonight, didn't we? Yeah, we went out to dinner and I invited you to dinner, remember? Yeah, but who pays in the end? I smiled back at her. See? That's the Steve that the girls in the office miss. The guy who sees the funny side in everything. Even if I'm going to order the most expensive dessert they have on the menu here. Sherry smiled back at me. I understand your point of view, and in the future I'll try to leave personal problems at home. Do something better, Steve. Get yourself a nice apartment or something and get out in the evenings. Even risk asking out some of the eligible women from the office. Look, I stay away from my coworkers because, well, sometimes I can look a little cheap when I dress up to go out and have fun. Some Romeo will take this the wrong way and think I'm easy. I'm sure you know what I mean. And as I've told you before, trying to teach the average man how to use a computer program while he stares at my cleavage is usually not very successful. I've seen it firsthand. I, of course, contradicted Sherry by saying that she could never look cheap, and we both smiled at each other. Then Sherry ordered her dessert. Not the most expensive one on the menu, by the way. Oddly enough, afterward we talked about Sherry's life and aspirations. I learned that she was 22 years old. To be honest, I always thought she was about 19, which was a little silly of me. I first met Sherry when we opened the Wales office about 18 months ago, and she knew her stuff then. For some reason, maybe because of the way she dressed, I somehow thought of her as a perpetual teenager. The first time I saw Sherry dressed to go out was the night I told you about. when she was meeting that young electrician guy in the hotel bar. I drove Sherry to the train station to catch her train, and she thanked me for the good food and pleasant evening. Then, as she got on the train, she said that we should do it again someday. I guess I had to agree with her. The next day at the office, I tried my best to put a smile on my face when I remembered it. And you know, it must have worked. I noticed that after about a day, people no longer left the tea room as soon as I crossed the threshold, and the people who had since avoided my desk, well, they didn't do that anymore and often stopped to pass the time. That same lunch hour, I visited some real estate agents and got a list of furnished apartments for rent locally. I guess I was still a little shy about buying, and if apartment life alone didn't work out, I could always go back to the hotel again. Well, I guess that was the thought in the back of my mind. That Thursday, I received an interesting call from Miss Clarkson. "How do you like 250,000, Steve?" Those were the first words she said to me. "I'm sorry. I don't get it, Miss Clarkson." Copeland, he's obviously not thrilled with all the press coverage he's getting. The man's got something to hide. Anyway, things are quietening down in the press, and we thought it would be a good time to hint that there may be a case for attachment alienation in the near future. I suspect Constance's legal advisors have also threatened something, but I can't know for sure. Anyway, Copeland's people came back with an offer of 50 grand for us to back off. We discussed it, and now their offer has increased to 250. We might even be able to squeeze another 25 or so out of those bastards if we nail them to the wall. Go ahead, Miss Clarkson, take every penny you can from the bastard, but preferably settle out of court. Constance isn't my favorite person in the world at the moment, but the fact that I've embarrassed her in court is not that it doesn't affect me at all. Very good, Steve. The press will probably get to it anyway. But you know how it works. The amount has to stay secret, which is almost as good as Copeland admitting that he... Yeah, okay, for a moment there. I was going to use your definition of him. Less than a week later, Miss Clarkson informed me that I would be 300,000 pounds richer as soon as I signed where indicated. I went straight to them and left my signature. While I was doing so, Miss Clarkson hinted that Constance might be buying her own new house soon and would probably pay cash for it. Miss Clarkson still wasn't sure what grounds Constance had used to set Copeland up, but suspected it was probably her bodily injury. A week or so later, I actually moved into a fairly decent apartment. It was farther away from my office, but with free parking, which was expensive in the area. The apartment was one bedroom, with a nice big living dining room and a surprisingly spacious, well-equipped kitchenette. There was a washer and dryer in the bathroom, but it was big enough to barely notice them. I don't know if it was because of the money Copeland put in my bank account or trying to follow Sherry's advice, but by the end of the month I was feeling much better and would occasionally stop in for a drink after work with some of the guys. We were sitting at a table of 3, me, my coworker who hadn't been with the company very long, maybe a month or so, and Bob, my boss. I was just showing them a spreadsheet I was working on when the computer screen went out. A second or so later, the dreaded blue screen appeared, but it was blank. Then words started appearing in the upper left corner, one character at a time. "Hey, Steve, guess who's buried here in the depths of hell playing with the servers?" Almost panicking, I quickly started typing. "Sherry, I'm in the middle of something important. I have people with me." Almost instantly, another message came through. "Oh, sorry guys, to be honest, this is an unofficial matter here. We had a deal for today, didn't we, Steve?" I was surprised when my boss reached past me and started typing. "Hi, Sherry, it's Bob. Of course, this evening, Steve is asking you out. The bastard rarely goes out these days." A text message came back. "Cheers, Bob. Same place, same hour, Steve. And remember, my train leaves at 9. Then the screen went out again before my spreadsheet reappeared. "Sorry about that," I said to my boss. "Sorry for what?" was his reply. Then he added, "Nice girl, that Sherry." Our new coworker sat there with a confused look on his face, but finally asked, "Who is Sherry?" "Someone a little closer to your age than mine," I answered him. "Oh, come on, Steve," Bob said. "She's really good for you. God, you need someone to liven up your life a little." "Bob, I'm 12 years older than her." "Well, what's 12 years between friends? Jesus, buddy, your mind is too fixated on numbers." After that, We went back to calculating in my spreadsheet again, making small changes here and there and figuring out what effect they would have on the end result. I guess it must have been half an hour or so when the spreadsheet disappeared again. And another message appeared. "Sorry, Steve, do I need a companion for lunch today? He'll meet you in reception at 12, Bob typed. "Thanks, Bob," came the reply, and then my spreadsheet reappeared. "Will I meet?" I asked Bob, probably annoyed that he had twice scheduled a face-to-face meeting on my behalf. "Of course you will. It's a request for help, after all. And have you ever turned down a lady? No matter who asked, the old Steve would have said yes. Have I really changed that much?" "No more than would be expected under the circumstances, my friend, but lately we've been seeing the old Steve slowly coming back. Now let's get on with these numbers." I quickly realized why Sherry had invited me to lunch. She had a co-worker who I assume was an admirer. He, of course, was furious that I had ruined his plans during their lunch break. I'd say he was also disappointed to learn that Sherry and I were having dinner together that evening and, therefore, she wouldn't be traveling back with him on the same train. Sherry did a good job of staying away from her co-worker. Frankly, I was surprised he didn't realize it. But perhaps he was thinking too much about himself and his charms, as is usually the case with some young men. Later that day, I traveled to the depths where the company's servers live and talked to him quietly when Sherry wasn't around. As I walked back to my floor, it occurred to me that it had been a long time since I had been forced to have a similar conversation with any of the alphas in the building. Sherry, when I met her in the reception area, still looked as delightful as usual after hours. That evening, another security guard felt honored to carry her portmanteau to my car. Sherry said this coworker was new to her company, but knew her from college, or rather was fully aware of what Sherry looked like, in plain clothes, as she liked to call it. She also thanked me for everything I had said to him during the day. That evening, we, or rather Sherry, did a little shopping before grabbing a quick bite to eat at a fast food diner. After walking through all those damn clothing stores, I was feeling pretty exhausted putting Sherry on her train. Do women really need to try on every piece of clothing that catches their eye? Mind you, I loved watching Sherry come out of the locker room to ask how she looked in what seemed to be increasingly shorter skirts each time. You know, guys, there comes a point when you just have to take the bull by the horns and say that a skirt borders on obscenity. And then what do women do? They buy that darkness. You know, if I had figured this out a little earlier, I wouldn't have been so hungry when we finally walked into this fast food joint. Over the next 6 months, my divorce became final, and I kind of got used to living on my own. I dated the guys from the office from time to time, but most of them were young and on the prowl. Hey, don't think I wasn't looking around, because I was. I just couldn't find anyone who, well, piqued my interest. My dates, well, I suppose I could call them dates, with Sherry became routine. Don't think there was anything romantic about them, because there wasn't. Sherry would tell me how her life was going and ask me about what I did in my spare time, often reprimanding me for not asking this or that lady out when I mentioned them. Sherry seemed to get the idea that if I mentioned a woman, I must surely be attracted to her, which, in a way, was probably true. But I couldn't find it in me to want to start dating again, feeling too old for that. When I mentioned this to Sherry, she started teasing me, calling me an old man. The next morning, after Sherry came downstairs, a newspaper headline caught my eye as I walked to the office. It turned out that Copeland had been arrested the day before. I bought a copy and tried to read it carefully as I walked. As usual, under the laws of jurisdiction in the UK, the accompanying story didn't say much. Only that Copeland had been arrested and charged with conspiracy and perverting the course of justice. The article went on to list a whole bunch of other people from around the country who had also been arrested. One young lady was charged with perjury on multiple counts. I believe 5 women, referred to as ex-spouses, were arrested and charged with conspiracy to discredit justice. The newspaper article mentioned that several other ex-spouses were believed to have fled the country, and extradition papers were being prepared as the newspaper went to press. 7 others were charged with various crimes, including conspiracy and aiding and abetting. Temptingly, the story went on to say that divorce agreements were being canceled for 12 of the ex-husbands. I understood that at the conclusion of the above cases, they would be reevaluated. I cannot claim to have followed the story, But the gist of it was that numerous divorce proceedings across the country involved the same young lady claiming to have had an affair with her husband's, and in one case, her wife. In each case, the reporter made up a story very similar to the one my mysterious friend had told me all those months ago, and in each case, there was quite a bit of cash involved in the settlement. Eventually, I saw my mysterious friend again. He was in the background of a news clip on television. A reporter was standing on the steps in front of the High Court in London, announcing that Copeland and his accomplices had been found guilty on all charges. The next day, Sherry was downstairs. Slightly unusual, I thought, because she usually came in on Thursdays, and today was Tuesday. And what's more, she barged into my department and waved a pair of theater tickets in my face. "What are you doing tonight, Steve?" "Well, nothing really." "Well, you can take me to dinner, and then I'll take you to the show." "I gotta warn you, you're gonna miss your train home." "No, I won't be late. There's one that leaves just after midnight. I'll take it instead of the one earlier." Then, after a few seconds, she added, "The last bus will leave, but my dad will pick me up from the station." Dinner was good, and the performance was enjoyable. All in all, it was a great evening until we got to the station. We both looked at the departure screen, and there were no northbound trains until 5 in the morning. Sherry went over to the timetable and reprimanded herself. She was wrong. All the earlier trains were leaving a few minutes after each hour, and for some reason the last one left at 10 to 12. "Oh, fuck," she said. "I'm going to have to stay here tonight." "I'll call my old hotel and see if they have a room," I suggested. "Oh, don't be a fool, Steve. I'll sleep on your couch and take the early train in the morning." Yes, we had an argument about that. No, I didn't see anything wrong with her staying in my apartment if she wanted to, so we didn't argue about that. We argued about which one of us would take the couch, me trying to play the gentleman. In the end, Sherry trumped my arguments, insisting that she would rather sleep on the bench on the station platform than force me off the bed. Back at the apartment, I found a spare sheet and thought I'd give Sherry my old sleeping bag I kept in the car as a blanket, just in case. Mind you, I had to keep it in the dryer for 20 minutes. It had been in the trunk for a very long time. While the dryer worked its magic, Sherry and I had tea, and she took a proper look around my apartment. A couple times before that, Sherry had stuck her nose in it briefly when we brought in frozen foods and the like that I bought for the house to put in the freezer. Then, while she showered, I, on the other hand, made what must have looked like a hell of a mess on the couch. For a short time, the heated discussion about which of us would sleep here reared its head again, until Sherry repeated her threat to go back to the railroad station. Once I had showered myself, we said goodnight to each other, and I went to my bedroom. I don't know what time it was when something woke me up. Yes, there was no doubt about it, someone was blowing gently in my left ear. "Sherry," I asked. "Yes, Steve?" "Looks like you're in the wrong bed, young lady." "Do you object, old man, or are you just stating a fact?" "Stating a fact, I guess." "Good. But Sherry?" "Steve, if you say one word about the 12-year age difference between us, well, we're not going to start our married life without a fight, are we?" "Married life? Yeah, now come on, show me what the old man can do." I wasn't surprised when Sherry didn't rush to the train first thing in the morning, finally realizing that she'd set me up quite effectively. On the way to the office, Sherry explained that she had traveled 4 days by train to train new employees in the accounting department. She didn't actually go home until Sunday evening that week, and she also informed me that her company had an opening for someone to work at my company almost full-time. Not full-time, of course, just 3 days a week, and it would be very flexible. No problem taking the kids to school and such, Sherry added. "Kids!" I add. "Of course, I want at least 2, and you'll make a great father, Steve." "Gosh, that's all right then. For one awful minute, I thought you were going to say 12. See, that's what I like about you. You always see the bright side of everything. We were on our honeymoon. It's that time between sessions when you lie in each other's arms, too excited to sleep, but too exhausted to start again. For now." "Sherry," I asked, "how long ago did you decide to become my wife?" "That's a good question, old boy. I suppose you could have told me when I saw the headlines in the papers about your first wife and that Copeland fellow." "Oh, that long ago?" Yes, but if you accused me of having a conniving nature, you might even question my motives for getting this fellow John to pick me up for dinner that night at the particular hotel I'd chosen. I've been keeping my eye on you for a while now. I'll have to keep an eye on you, won't I? Yes, old sport, but don't mistake me for Constance. I know what I want when I see it, and I'll never do anything that would mean I risk losing it. Epilogue. Well, I mentioned that Sherry and I ran into a very surprised June in Malta, so I guess I should tell you what she told me. June said that she thought Constance had an underlying tendency to be submissive, which somehow Copeland had recognized and caught on to. June noted that after reading the newspapers, she concluded that many of the women involved in his divorce plots appeared to have been influenced by the man in some way. I hadn't followed the fine details of the case, so this was news to me. June said that they all seemed to want to take full responsibility for everything, although the only one who figured in every single case was Copeland. I don't know what that man has got, but he can get some women around his little finger, June told me. But Constance turned her back on Copeland and sued him, didn't she? I made an observation. Constance is my little sister, Steve. I've always taken care of her, and perhaps it's my own fault. Perhaps Constance has always obeyed my wishes. It was I who pushed her to this trial. I suppose she would not have had the courage to bring it to a conclusion if I had not done so. Fortunately, Copeland relented and settled out of court. I don't know how Constance would have behaved if they had confronted each other in the courtroom. By the way, is this your new fiancé, Steve? Sure is. Sherry chased me down and caught me. She made a very good choice. June smiled back at me. Life goes on.